So when you think about American conspiracies, the name of the series, you're gonna think about the government's cover-up of aliens. And this is the classic one. Government winds up being the one who says that aliens exist by their line. Kind of arrogant to believe that we're in this huge universe. We're one planet in this huge universe, and we think we're the only life. We're the center.
So, Kevin, not to be too blunt, why should we believe you? What are your qualifications?
Well, I spent a number of years as an Army helicopter pilot, Air Force intelligence officer, so I have some insight into the way that the military and the government operates in those arenas. I've spent 25 years investigating UFO sightings. I've talked to literally hundreds of people who have had some sort of an encounter, people who were involved in the Roswell, New Mexico crash back in 1947. So I've looked at this very, very carefully with an eye to explaining what was going on as opposed to making it more mysterious.
And as for your career as an author?
Well, I've been writing for about UFOs for 25 years. I've done an awful lot of magazine articles about it, and I've done a number of books, which include the UFO crash at Roswell, The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, Conspiracy of Silence, which looks at the way the government has conducted their UFO investigations, Faces of the Visitors with Russ Estes, which looks at the reports of alien creatures, what they look like, what people have reported about them. So I've done an awful lot of research in a lot of different arenas in the UFO field.
All right. We've heard the word Roswell about 10 or 20 times already. Just in case somebody doesn't know, what's the government's definition of Roswell?
The government
crash at Roswell. The
government will tell you that what crashed in Roswell, New Mexico, was nothing more spectacular than a balloon or a cluster of balloons and radar targets, which were part of the top secret Project Mogul. They imply in their work that Project Mogul was something so highly classified that the men and women at Roswell, New Mexico wouldn't have recognized it for what it was. In reality, what Project Mogul was regular weather balloons, radar targets, nothing that was not easily identifiable as being terrestrial manufacture and easily identifiable as balloons and radar targets. They try to tell us that the Roswell story has come about because of a bunch of writers like myself who are in it to make a buck. We're just spreading the myth of the Roswell case to make some money. Patently absurd allegation on their parts, but that's what they attempt to do. What Roswell really was a crash of an alien spacecraft. If you take a look at the history of the UFO phenomenon, we find Kenneth Arnold making his sighting on June 24th, 1947. This is the sighting that gets everybody turned on about the flying discs, about the flying saucers. They're all talking about it. If you look at the newspaper articles from that time frame, we see an awful lot of articles about what they are. Are they extraterrestrial? And at that time, they were talking about interplanetary. Are they secret experiments? Are they Soviet? Are they all sorts of different explanations? But then after the Roswell crash takes place on July 4th, 1947, we see the Air Force, the Army Air Forces actually, announced that they had captured a flying saucer. Within 3 hours, they said, no, we made a mistake. It was just a weather balloon. We just made a mistake. Our officers at Roswell, New Mexico, the men of the 509th Bomb Group, the only atomic strike force in the world at the time, are so incompetent that they can't recognize a balloon and a radar target, but that's what it was. And then you see the articles appear on the 9th of July. The Army and Navy moved today to suppress the stories of flying saucers whizzing through our atmosphere. Why suddenly on July 9th does the government care that these stories are in the newspapers? Up to that point, they hadn't cared. And the answer is they've got one, and now they want to have an opportunity to exploit this find without having to worry about our competitors in the world.
All right, now did it go from... So a spaceship craft, just like an airplane crashes, a spaceship crashes, shouldn't there be bodies?
Oh, absolutely. Well, we could take a look at some of our own space program and say, well, if some of our space probes had crashed, Voyager, Viking, there wouldn't be bodies. There would be electronic parts scattered all over the place. If an Apollo had crashed or the space shuttle crashed, yes, then you'll have bodies. In Roswell, there were in fact bodies. There were a number of people who saw the bodies. I've spoken to probably a dozen people who saw the bodies. There is no doubt that alien creatures, around 5 feet tall, head slightly larger than a head on a human body, eyes slightly larger than human eyes, very fragile individuals, no question that bodies were found. And what we know is that the bodies were taken off the crash site, taken to the Roswell Army Airfield, put onto 2 aircraft, and then flown out of Roswell so that they could be studied later. No question about that.
And what does the government say when people question the alien bodies? What is the government's response?
Well, interestingly enough, in 1994, when the Air Force did investigate the Roswell case again and said it was a weather balloon, they said, well, there were no bodies and the people talking about that were mistaken. But in 1997, they released their second final report on the Roswell case. The first one was their final report. Now they've got a second one. They said, well, we looked at the evidence again, and in fact, there were bodies. But what happened is, in the 1950s, we were testing ejection systems, parachutes, escape systems for high-flying jet aircraft, and we were dropping anthropomorphic dummies over the Southwest. And these reports of bodies at the Roswell case, remembering, of course, this was 1947, not the 1950s, was the people seeing those anthropomorphic dummies and in their minds compressing the time so that they believed it was 1947, and that was how we got to the reports of the bodies. Makes no difference that the anthropomorphic dummies looked extremely human. There's a photograph in the Air Force's report of 2 Air Force officers propping up one of these dummies, and it's taller than they are, so they're at least 6 feet tall, very robust. They've got a skeleton made out of metal so that they can check to see how the bone structure would handle the impact from some of these ejection systems and things like that. But the real point is they didn't drop any anthropomorphic dummies in the Roswell, New Mexico area until 1959.
All right, so the government is, let's say the government you have a very strong argument, so we'll give it to you. They're covering up the Roswell crash. Why? Why would the government keep this a secret from us?
I think if we take a look at 1947, we're suddenly presented with a craft that outperforms anything we have. You know, we're just beginning to move into the jet arena. Suddenly we're presented with a craft that outperforms everything. If we can decode that, if we can figure out how it works, we take a major leap ahead of all our competitors in the world. And if we convince them that there's no such thing to flying saucers, we don't have to worry about espionage. They're not going to try to penetrate our secret investigation of this downed UFO if we have convinced them that there's no such thing as UFOs. So I think if we take a look at it in that arena, that makes a little bit of sense. It also makes sense that we've just come out of a very disastrous war, the Second World War. Millions of people are dead. Europe is in ruins. And suddenly we're presented with a force from outside our planet. We don't know anything about it. I think back in 1947, they wanted an opportunity to see if they could learn anything about this before they presented to the public. To tell them, you know, there's these flying saucers out there. We can't do anything about them, but they're out there. And I think there was a certain amount of paranoia still around from the Second World War. If we move forward in time, we come to the 1960s when the Brookings Institution did a study on what would happen if there was a confrontation between people of Earth and an extraterrestrial civilization. Not necessarily a face-to-face confrontation as we're talking about with flying saucers or visitation, but the mere introduction of this knowledge that there's a superior civilization out there. And what we learn is that anytime a technologically superior civilization has come in contact with a technologically inferior civilization, that technologically inferior civilization has ceased to exist. Not necessarily through conquest or warfare, but the mere introduction of the technology radically alters the civilization and changes it. And of the 15 disciplines that were used to complete the study, anthropologists, theologians, economists, psychologists, 14 of the 15 said it would be disastrous for our civilization. So I think that kind of gets the thing going again. And of course, once you have something classified, it's very difficult to get it declassified or unclassified. And so we have this event from 1947 that's extremely highly classified, and it's difficult to get that declassified in today's arena, especially if they still have no good answers about what exactly is going on, or if they know, they can't do anything about it. What we learned from the Condon Committee, which was a University of Colorado study in 1969, sponsored by the Air Force, was that the flying saucers pose no threat to national security, meaning obviously they're not invading. They'd been around at that point from some 22 years and hadn't launched the invasion. Now it's even longer than that, 50 years now. The invasion has not started, so clearly there's not a risk to national security, so they can take a step back and take a look at it with a much keener eye than if they were pressed into trying to answer it immediately, as they felt they were in 1947.
All right, so if All right, let's put you at the controls again, Kevin.
Oh.
You are the President of the United States. What do you do? Is there enough proof from your investigation that we need to start arming ourselves or preparing scientifically, psychologically, et cetera, in any way, economically, for interaction with aliens, or is that so far down the line it's not time to prepare?
We don't control it. Meaning the people of Earth do not control the contact. The contact will come when they determine the contact should come. We cannot control it. If they land tomorrow, I think we're going to see economic upheaval. Yeah, people are going to be frightened in the very beginning, but then they're going to say, things aren't that bad. But if they've announced to us that one crashed in 1947, that something was found from another planet in 1947, and then the aliens land, we say, 50 years ago. They've been around for 50 years. It has not affected my life. So the problem is, do we keep the secret and worry about them showing up tomorrow, or do we tell people what has been going on? And so when the contact takes place, we have a 50-year cushion to fall back on.
So it won't be so
this all happened before. The Roswell case happened before I was born. And even for people who are 70 and 80 years old, they can say, well, this happened 50 years ago, and it has not affected my life to this point. Why should I worry about it now? But if they land tomorrow, even with our enlightened society, with our discussions of space travel and our discussions of space flight, there may be the great economic upheaval that they fear. I think they could stop it if they would tell us the truth.
So we don't need to go and we don't need to build giant laser beams. All we need to do is tell the truth, and that might help cushion the blow.
If they're invaders, we could basically be screwed. even if we start preparing today, look at it from another point of view. Well, take a look at I was thinking rapidly here. Think of the movie The Final Countdown, where the USS Nimitz goes back through the time warp to Pearl Harbor, and they're discussing whether or not the Nimitz has the power to destroy the Japanese fleet sailing toward Pearl Harbor. And the captain of the Nimitz says, "Don't worry, they have nothing that we cannot handle." So here is an invasion force, the Japanese invasion force or attack force, that at that time frame, who was going to win was based on who had the most power, and how much you could marshal against it. And suddenly we have a single aircraft carrier that can destroy that entire invasion force without any sort of without really breaking a sweat, if you will. Or we can take a look, what would happen if we took an army of today and moved it back to the Civil War? Or not even an army, just a company or a division. And look at the damage it could do to the entire Union Army or Confederate Army, depending on which side you're on. You could destroy the whole thing with very little in the way of power. There's nothing they could do to counter that.
All right, Kevin, what is Project Moondust and the conspiracy theory surrounding that?
Project Moondust was an investigation that began, according to the Air Force, back in 1953. And what they were doing is they wanted reaction teams to recover returning space debris of Soviet manufacture or unknown origin. They want to be able to pick up satellites. Now, the question becomes, who in 1953 was launching satellites? Nobody. But they talk about the beginnings of Moondust in 1953. We know Moondust was related to UFOs. It was not exclusively UFOs, but we know it was related to UFOs because some of the documentation we've recovered through Freedom of Information specifically mention UFOs. And if you've got a team to recover debris that is returning from space from unknown origins, well, obviously that can cover UFOs. But we know that Project Moondust had a mission of looking at UFOs. Now, when Senator Jeff Bingaman of New Mexico queried the Air Force about Moondust, he was told, we have no such project. It has never existed. When the documentation was presented to the Air Force showing the Moondust documents that it actually did exist, the Air Force wrote back and said, well, we'd like to amend our last statement. Moondust existed, we just never used it. Now, I have got in my possession documents that show it was used at least 7 times. None of those cases relate specifically to flying saucers or UFOs, but we know that Moondust had been used. And another researcher, when he queried the Air Force in 1986 about Moondust, they said, well, that code name doesn't exist anymore. We've changed it. So here we have a UFO investigative project that started in 1953, before anybody was launching stuff into space, supposedly to look at that stuff, that existed far beyond the end of Project Blue Book, which was the official investigation. So when the Air Force got out of the business in 1969, they said, we don't investigate UFOs anymore. But Moondust proves that they in fact did, or the government still had an organization on the books to look at UFO-related materials. And in 1986, they changed the code name because it had been inadvertently compromised, meaning that people like you and me knew about it, knew that Moondust existed. It had been a classified project and with a classified code name. And we can't even be told what the code name for the new project is. All we know is that Moondust still exists under a different code name.
So the more lying they do, the more covering up, the more and more it makes all of us believe they're kind of digging their own grave that aliens do exist.
Well, here's something for you, because
John F. Kennedy, the youngest president we've ever had, and the first one born in the 20th century, was shaking up the status quo, and the status quo struck back. That's the bottom line.
All right, so he was shaking up the status quo, and the status quo being who?
The status quo being every violent and powerful faction in this country, starting with the military, coming through the CIA and the intelligence community, coming on down to the international bankers, coming into the large manufacturing defense contractors, the oil men, the mafia, you name it. Every major, powerful, violent faction in this country, he had angered.
What do we know for sure about alien life, and what can we make a pretty good educated guess on? What can we really speculate on?
The only thing that we can really say is that visitation has taken place, that beings from other planets have managed to circumvent the vast distances of space and have visited our planet in the last 50 years. I personally believe that the visitation has not been very frequent. It's very, very rare to have a craft in the atmosphere, but it has taken place. From what we know that one crashed at Roswell. We know a little bit about their technology. We know a little bit about what they look like. But none of that information has provided us, meaning you and me and most of the American people, with any ideas about where they come from. Those clues may have been in the craft. I have been told by some people, and unfortunately we can't confirm any of this, that they do know the planet or the system of origin for some of the alien beings that have visited us, but we just don't have any good information. Major Edwin Easley, who was the provost marshal of the 509th Bomb Group in July of 1947, told me flat out that the craft was extraterrestrial. I mean, he was there, he was on the scene, he had no reason to lie about it. He could have blown me off because he didn't know who I was, and I just called him and talked to him a little bit about this case. But he told me the craft was extraterrestrial. Any of Colonel Blanchard's staff members, the major staff members that we have been able to talk to, have all told us that this event took place. It's all the other people that are saying, nah, it never happened. But the people who were there, the people we could identify as being there, told us it took place. So what we know is that alien visitation has taken place, and has been taking place for at least 50 years. That's what we know. Everything beyond that enters the realm of speculation.
All right. We have the Roswell crash, and when we think crash, we think accidents. Do they know we're here? And if they know we're here, why have they not made a very public attempt to make communication with us and to talk to us, even conquer us? Just almost to use an analogy similar to your Columbus analogy, when the English colonies gained more land east of the Mississippi, we automatically wanted to go into that territory. Why don't they want to interact with Earth yet? Why are they holding back?
Well, suddenly I have to speculate with an alien mind, and we just don't know what the motivations may be. But let's just take one quick look from our own history again, and it would be anthropological. The prime directive: observe but don't interfere. And that may be it, that they are waiting for us to reach a certain level of technology. They've got to know we're here. They've got to know we're intelligent. Heck, we're broadcasting all kinds of radio signals and television signals off the planet. The Earth is surrounded by satellites beaming information all over the place. Space junk orbits the planet. We've got probes onto other planets. Just all sorts of evidences of civilization. So if they're visiting, then yeah, they know that we're here. They know we're intelligent. Why haven't they made contact? I don't know. I really don't know. And it may be something as simple as they're observing us to see which direction our civilization takes before they make contact. It may be that they want to learn more about us before they make contact. Or it could be something as simple that every time they've gotten really close to the ground, somebody shot at them. And I don't know how many stories we hear about the craft being close to the ground, and some yo-yo gets out there with his .357 Magnum or his deer rifle and takes a few shots at them to drive them off.
Makes sense.
Or even worse than that, the U.S. government sending fighters to intercept. And how many times have these fighters fired upon the UFOs? We have any number of cases, documented cases, where American fighter craft have fired upon UFOs. So that may be an incentive not to come down and talk to us right there, because they don't want to get shot at.
For your fans, and I think you just made about 20. You've just made about 20 more fans. What can we be expecting from you in the future?
Well, we've got, as you've mentioned, the book on Project Moondust coming out here in just a few weeks. And I've got another book about scientific ufology, where I take a look at UFOs and kind of apply the scientific method and kind of apply various research techniques that you would learn using science to the UFO phenomenon, see if there's anything scientifically that we can take a look at. Not speculations, not the cases that are a little shaky, but what exactly do we have in the way of evidence? And I think that work's going to be very persuasive. People are going to see there's a lot more evidence for the existence of UFOs out there than they have been led to believe.
All right. Well, thank you, Kevin Randall, for joining the show.